Produced by Victoire.
Masters of Wrestling gives a special thanks to Mr. Jesse Hernandez and the EWF. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Styling, the podcast. I am one of your co-stars, the Master Emir, along with my co-star, ladies and gentlemen. He is a former WWE Tag Team Champion. He's also an AEW superstar with some questionable individuals, and we'll get to that later down the line. But ladies and gentlemen, please welcome back to the show, Rico Casatino.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back. Great to see you. Just got off the Ponderosa training my horses, getting ready for cowboy mounted shooting, and coming in to do another wonderful show with the master.
Rico, I wanted to ask you because I've noticed that the chops, the sideburns have gone. And also I haven't seen the tiger suit for a number of weeks now.
Well, everybody has to change, revolutionize, move into a new era in their life. And I didn't mind being the stylist with the sideburns and stuff like that, but I'm in a new genre now. I'm getting older. I'm into cowboy mounted shooting. And you could say, like, I'm a chameleon. Yeah. This is the environment I'm in right now. I might not be in the ring, but I will be in arenas soon around the country doing the cowboy mounted shooting. Yeah. So this is how I live my life. This is I dress every day and do my thing. You got to reinvent yourself. Yeah. So this is the new stylist and new goals and new gates and doors I got to open and go through.
And I am certain, Rico, that you will be a cowboy mounted shooting champion. That I know, and fans, I tell you, if there's one person that I know is disciplined and dedicated, much like myself, it is my co-star, my good friend, my brother in Christ, Rico Constantino. But Rico, before we indulge into this episode, we're going to be talking about Maven Huffman, and I'm sure a lot of you know him. Rico, what would you ask of our viewers before we begin?
I would like to politely ask, lay the smack down on that subscribe button, like it, and share it with your friends. Get it out there. Everybody needs to hear this.
Yes, indeed.
Especially with Maven.
Yeah, exactly. And especially with Maven, we've got cooking for you today. But I also want to remind everybody, again, if you feel so inclined, if you want to support the content of this channel, don't be shy. Slap a super chat, a super sticker, a gift, what have you. You can also support this channel by using the Cash app. That's $ Masters of Wrestling. And to show your support even more, proudly wear the Style in the Podcast original t-shirt. They are available right now for order. Use the email address in the description of the video. Get in contact with us. Give us your size, your location, and we'll provide you with payment details, and we'll get those t-shirts out to you swiftly. Now, the announcements are out of the way, and we're going to get on with this episode. So this is interesting because Maven Huffman, I'm sure every one of our viewers are familiar with Maven. He has a very successful wrestling podcast. He's probably more successful now than he ever was in the WWE, but that's not taken away from the fact that he was a WWE superstar. As he often says, I had the greatest job in the world. I was a WWE superstar, as he often says at the beginning of his show. Now, he was, and he did do very well, surprisingly to me, and I'm certain to a lot of people, because Rico, he came through the Tough Enough program. Now, this was when WWE was trying to farm talent in an unconventional way. They weren't doing this prior to that. They were discovering guys on the indies. They had guys coming up from OVW, but this was a way. It was like it was an MTV show, if I remember correctly. And
with Al Snow.
With Al Snow, contestants would write in, send their videos in, and then those lucky few that got called in would go through the training program and learn to become champions. They're not born in the gym. It starts from the inside and it works its way out. Do you feel it more difficult to obtain muscle? Are you tired or perhaps depressed? Then there's a solution. Our brand new partner and sponsor, Care Aesthetics of La Quinta, are here to help you get restored to optimal health. Just use the contact information in this video and schedule your free consultation. Be sure to mention the name of the podcast, whether that be Power and Glory, Styling, Masterclass, or Hey Roma, when doing so. We wish you all the best in your road to optimized health. And now, back to the show. Got called in, would go through the training program, and learn to become a WWE superstar. So Maven was successful at that at the time, and this would have been right around the time you debuted, in fact, Rico, in the WWE, I think 2001-ish. But then he comes in. Tell us your first impressions of Maven and what you thought of him and how he was received by the locker room.
Well, he was really polite. He was quiet. He didn't run around bragging about his tough enough win and stuff like that. So he's a very humble guy, very nice guy too. I wrestled Maven as the stylist and as the Adrian Street character, and numerous house shows. We clicked,
Yeah.
and he had talent. He would learn. He'd be out there before the shows like I was, practicing moves and stuff like that, developing moves. And he would just listen. He wouldn't talk a lot,
Mhm.
which is smart, and you just pick things up. And I'm pretty sure after he got off the Tough Enough show and got put on, he got the big push,
Mhm.
and my personal feeling is later on, I think creative just kind of let him do what he
Yeah.
did. They didn't give him a push. I know he did have a angle with the Taker,
Mhm.
Dead Man, um, and I don't know what happened after that. But like I said, he was always open for everything. Really nice guy, athletic ability. You know, I seem to think like when I wrestled him, I brought his charisma out
Mhm.
more, I as the stylist, because I was the complete heel and he was cheered, I mean, one of the loudest pops, in my matches is when they introduced Maven,
Yeah.
when I was out there first, and then the people would go nuts for him, and
Yeah.
he, get him going and stuff like that.
Mhm.
Um, I think nowadays he's more creative, understands a lot more now, because I think it was like me, I had only been in the business 8 months, 12
Mhm.
matches, and here I am. And then Vince tosses me this stylist character, and we've gone over that on how I came up with it
Yeah.
with the creative mind and stuff like that. I don't know if they were directing Maven or let him come up with his own ideas. I'm not sure how close he and Vince were,
Mhm.
but I loved wrestling Maven. In
Yeah.
fact, um, there was one time when I just turned to the Adrian Street character, and to get Maven, uh, you know, out of his little, get him more animated,
Yeah.
because you didn't know what I was. I'm slapping him in the butt, pinching his cheek and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And we're in the middle of the match, and I'm wearing white, sparkly tights
Yeah.
and no shirt. I forgot the makeup scheme, but we chain wrestle a couple times, then and that, and we break, and we're doing the stare down.
Yeah.
And I look at him and I go, I said, hold on. I open my tights. I reach down into my tights,
Yeah.
and I come out with an old hotel key,
Oh my
with the
gosh.
big green thing like Motel 6 with
Yeah.
the key, and I start dangling it in front of his head.
Oh man.
Well, he went, what?
Yeah.
Smacked that out of my hand.
Yeah.
And then we had to go,
Yeah.
He was like, what did you do?
Did he have any
But
idea you were going to do that, or was that just a surprise you threw on him?
I I can't remember if we discussed it or not. But yeah, I had the hotel key in my pants
That's funny, man. That's
when I went
genius.
to the ring.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
stuff would just pop,
Yeah.
and I would just do it. Sometimes I let the wrestlers know, sometimes I wouldn't.
Yeah, that's some genius storytelling that there. Much needed. We need that kind of storytelling now. But going back to Tough Enough, Rico, for the benefit of the
Right.
viewers here. So let's talk about Tough Enough because back then, as our viewers may or may not know, the wrestling business was very, very guarded, extremely guarded. Kayfabe had already been broken, but there was still the legends like Undertaker, Hulk Hogan, all these other guys
Yeah.
that really had to crawl, scratch, and even in today that still exists. You know, I mean, I see that on the independent circuit out here in California. There is, you have to crawl and scratch. So when a guy or several guys are just brought in on a reality TV show and whisked to the top, much like what's happened in WWE. I heard a story, just sorry for the tangent, but I forget it is. There's a rapper who came out with The Rock at WrestleMania. I forget his name.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, but oh no, it was, oh, I don't know if it was that one. We talked about the one that came out in the Rumble.
Yes, we talked about him. Exactly. Yeah. I show speed
Right.
or something like that. So, you know,
Yeah.
these guys come in, they're trained and they're shot to the moon. So there's obviously going to be with anybody who's got any ounce of passion for pro wrestling, going to be some resentment. It's like if you were a doctor somewhere and some guy straight out of medical school comes in and he's whisked up to the top of the, you know. So were you cognizant? Were you around any guys that were resentful of Maven when he first came in the locker room? Did you hear
Well,
anything?
they were resentful of me too, because here I was, and when they finally found out my background, because word gets around. I mean, the
Yeah.
locker room, they talk amongst each other,
Yeah.
and that's why I keep saying that's why Hardcore Holly is so misunderstood. You know, even in the Tough Enough one, he sees it like we see it, or
Yeah.
like you see it.
Yeah.
I was part of the people that got in, and then my gimmick took off, the first gimmick. So that gets resentment in the locker room, especially with the older guys who had to scratch and crawl and suffer, sleep in their car, work 7 days a week,
Mhm.
indies and stuff like that. And you heard last week's guest say that, or no, you heard Marty Jannetty
Yep.
work 90 days straight.
Yeah.
You
Insane.
know, those people sweat, blood, breathed, lived wrestling. And
Yeah.
then here comes this new hot shot that the company shoots right by them.
Yeah.
You know, so you're gonna have it. And well, I know we've talked about Bubba Ray, but he's one of those guys too. You
Mhm.
got to earn your bones.
Yeah.
You got
Yeah.
to put in your time. You got to show the respect. You have to honor the kayfabe. And the older guys, yeah. But when Vince McMahon's pulling the strings and saying, well, this is the Tough Enough show, they're going to win $1 million or whatever it was,
Mhm.
and they're going to get a contract and be shot, you know, be focus point because we want the show to see, you know, reality, because
Yeah.
that's kind of, it was a reality show.
Yeah.
So they're going to put them directly in the spotlight. So
Mhm.
they didn't really earn their way there. So the older guys, the older wrestlers are going to be miffed with that, you
Yeah.
know, because, you know, and rightfully so.
Mhm.
And I give, you know, and I'm not pounding on Bubba, but he has a right to be because he came from low and up high. So he had every right.
Yeah.
He did it with me,
Yeah.
you know. Um, I think Maven had the Tough Enough Shield, and
Mhm.
Al Snow was there.
Mhm.
So, I mean, even in the wrestling matches, Al Snow wrestled with Maven and stuff like that. We did six mans with Maven and Al, and regular tag teams, me and somebody against Maven and Al and stuff like. But Al really liked Maven
Mhm.
because of all the effort and how humble he was. Because Al's the same way,
Mhm.
very nice man, but
Yeah.
came up through the bottom. So I think Al protected Maven from a lot of stuff that could have happened bad,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
and you
Because I
know,
can imagine back then, Rico. I mean, you're talking 2002. Ric Flair was still there performing constantly. You had some of these guys. I mean, it must have been unnerving for a young guy like Maven
well,
at the
yeah.
time. Yeah, for
Well,
sure.
yeah, you know, but you know, he handled it,
Mhm.
and like I said, he took it as far as he could. I think now he's more successful, more
Mhm.
creative with his podcast was just humongous. I
Yeah.
mean, I wish all the best for Maven,
Yeah.
you
No, he's
know,
really hit
but
his stride. He's really hit his stride now.
yeah,
Yeah.
but he should have taken the hotel key.
Yeah, he should have. It may have done wonders for his gimmick and his character at the time. I agree with you there. Maybe not for him personally. It may have been scarred for
Uh,
life, but nonetheless,
right. Yeah.
But when I think of Tough Enough, though, when I think of Tough Enough, I can't help but go back to October of 1999 when the WWE became a publicly traded company. Because we're gonna
Right.
go somewhere with this. Viewers, stay with us. This is all going to add up at the end of this episode. So they became a publicly traded company, and then within what? That's a year and a half. And now, bearing in mind, Tough Enough was probably put into production a year before it debuted on TV, at least.
Hmm.
So maybe almost right away. So I gotta wonder if it was the sponsors or the other shareholders that were pushing for this new reality angle. Because again, once you open up a company from private to publicly traded company, you start getting more chefs in the kitchen, and now your creativity is taken out of your control, out of the wrestling world, and put into this other world. So it's not
Yeah.
necessarily, I don't think, that we could point the finger and blame and say, oh, it was Vince McMahon and the whole team that wanted this Tough Enough. It may have been an outside influence that wanted to start
Yeah.
changing the business. What do you think?
Well, yeah, as soon as you go public, you're going to have, like you said, more chefs in the kitchen, more chiefs than Indians, and everybody, whoever larger share they hold, has more say so. And that's why there's a board now.
Yeah,
Vince didn't have a board before like this.
yeah.
There's people from many walks of life that give him advice and stuff like that. But you said something earlier before we went on about Tough Enough and how
Mhm.
they farmed the people.
Yeah.
I want to touch on that because um, everybody in the past, when we were brought up, like I said, I had my American Gladiators. I was a stunt man. I did Conquer Fort Boyard. I was part of the power team. I was a bodybuilder.
Mhm.
So I had athletic,
Mhm.
and being on television show, you got to have a charisma because out of 15,000 people for gladiators, they picked 20 men and 20 women. And it's not because you're an athlete, because there were better athletes than me
Yeah.
that tried out for this show. They just didn't have the charisma to
Mhm.
be on camera.
Right.
So I think with the Tough Enough thing, I think they were looking for a little bit of charisma, but they were looking for athletic ability.
Hmm.
And, with a wrestler, professional wrestler, you got to have an even amount. You
Yeah.
got to be able to turn the switch,
Yeah.
flip the switch, and like when you open the curtain, bing, you are now Rico the stylist,
Hmm.
Maven from Tough Enough.
Hmm.
You know, I think, like I said, with me, I had an athletic background. I don't know what Maven had, but Ken Shamrock,
Hmm.
MMA fighter, uh, Kurt Angle, Olympic gold medalist, Brock Lesnar, NCAA wrestling, Shelton Benjamin, wrestling awards, Charlie Haas, Seton Hall,
Hmm.
champion wrestler, Blackman,
Yeah. Steve Blackman.
Steve Blackman, they all came from something physical, athletic, had good bodies. They just needed to learn the wrestling part. That's what the indies were for, to
Hmm.
take people who have, the raw material, and then the indies would form them like
Hmm.
mold, like make a clay sculpture out of them,
Yeah. Yeah.
and I think the Tough Enough, we're just looking for athletes and a little charisma and then promote the show,
Yeah.
because
Yeah, as you were talking, it made me think a lot more about, and again, where we're going to eventually arrive at the crescendo of this episode. You have to have a broad spectrum of talent. What defined wrestling, as we talked about in our last episode during the golden era, was the diversity. You had your star athletes like your Mr. Perfect, Kurt Hennig, Dynamite Kid. You had those guys, but they were sprinkled amidst the characters like Hulk Hogan. If Hulk Hogan just came out, gave someone a big boot and dropped the leg, that would have been enough to sell tickets back then because he was a
yep.
larger than life. Same with the Warriors, same with Savage. But then
Andre the Giant,
Andre the Giant, he wasn't he didn't flip or anything.
he
So
was huge.
yeah, or Earthquake, Typhoon, right? All these
Earthquake,
guys.
Typhoon, yeah.
But you need
Bam Bam
those.
Bigelow,
Bam Bam Bigelow.
uh, uh, uh,
Who are you thinking of?
uh, Um,
King Kong Bundy?
King Kong Bundy and the black guy,
Ma
Vespa or
Mabel.
Vesper,
He was originally Mabel.
Mabel.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I'm
Yeah.
thinking of.
Viscera. Viscera.
Viscera.
Okay.
Yeah,
God rest
but
his soul. Yeah.
yeah, but
Yeah.
like I said, they were just larger than life in real life.
Hmm.
You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah. Well,
these were mountains going by you.
yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, so that's a spectacle just there.
Yeah.
They didn't need to do a lot of bumping.
Nope. But then what
Uh-uh.
happened is once you have this publicly traded, it started, it was the door that started to open for this athletic prowess movement. Tough Enough began it. And I think
Yeah,
right now, the situation that wrestling's found itself 24 years later, 23 years later, is it's been inundated now with this athletic prowess. And now what you're lacking, which is why wrestling has been, again, this is just an astute observation. I'm not saying this is right or this is wrong. I'm saying by deductive reasoning and analyzing what I've seen for the past 20 years, you have an inundation of athletic prowess and movements and lack of characters and variety. And then you're not the magic. I saw this described in the other day, a video. The magic of professional wrestling is now diminished because now you don't have that. If everybody's a superstar athlete, then why is it pro wrestling? Then why doesn't it just become a company that we're doing? We've had some podcasts with Shoot Pro Wrestling. Why don't you just turn it into Real Pro Wrestling then? Shoot, because if you're going that route, then you're stripping the entertainment away from it slowly but surely over the past 20 years. And now all you're left with is Olympic style pro wrestling. Shoot, that's it. Um, but going back
wait,
to, yeah.
on that point,
Hmm.
it just popped in my head. Let's go back to the golden era like we did.
Hmm.
There was no shoot. You rarely saw somebody shot off the rope, but in the turnbuckles, yes,
Right.
tossed out of the ring, little movement outside, but they were characters.
Yeah.
Some were fat,
Yeah.
out of shape, but they were big.
Yeah.
They wore the little Speedo type trunks back
Yep.
then,
Yep. Yep.
but they wrestled, they
Yeah.
grappled.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then when that started to die out, so I think the characters died out because they started looking for people with athletic ability, like the lucha libres
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah.
that could move fat. Well, you can't get somebody like Luthez, to bounce around like that.
No.
You can't do it,
No.
And so they were relying on the persona they would present to the audience. Ric Flair,
Yeah.
Arn Anderson, the Four Horsemen, all that.
Heck,
Dusty Rhodes,
Bruiser Brody.
Bruiser Brody.
Yeah.
Are you going to see Dusty come off the top rope?
No.
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 But Dusty Rhodes, the American Dream.
Yeah.
He made it all on character, and knew what his limits were in the ring. But he was entertaining on what he had. It
Yeah.
wasn't the quantity of what he had. He based himself on quality. And
Yeah.
the prior people I spoke about earlier,
Yeah.
they did the quality. They
Yeah.
did their best moves, and that's what they didn't worry about flipping, doing spring shots, moonsaults, none of that.
Mhm.
But then when we started getting into the lucha libre type, high spots, shooting off the rope, this, that, shoulder tackle, stuff like that. Well, the other guys couldn't do that. And I think that's where the charisma went down
Mhm.
and the technicality came back up.
Yeah.
The pendulum swung.
It swung,
So,
and like so many times, once it swings in one direction, it's got to swing really hard back in the other way before it can balance itself out in the center. So I
right.
think now, and again, I'm not going to mention any names or anything, but for anybody who is a pro wrestling fan, and Rico, I know there's a lot of attention on wrestling this week, a lot of cutbacks, a lot of releases,
Oh, boy.
a
Yeah.
lot of stuff going on. And again, for me, I always think, well, okay, if you're going to do that, then obviously something in the business model is not working. It's not connecting with the fans. And I think one of the things that's most important with connection is the passion for the business. And this will tie into what I'm talking about with Maven and Tough Enough. So when you've got guys who genuinely love pro wrestling, genuinely love it, they can't wait to do it, they'll do it for free and what have you. That's a special kind of individual. That's the type of individual that's going to be as creative as possible, who's going to put everything out to make sure that that crowd is interested in them. When you farm talent that are just athletes, they do not possess that passion to merge with the crowd. And as we've seen so many times before, I mean, I've been around some professional athletes, and to be honest with you, all they care about is the profession. I've been around a basketball player. That's all they think about. They're not thinking about the fans. They're not thinking about that personal connection with the fans and kids. They're thinking about winning that match. So if you employ athletes who have that mindset, how can you ever imagine that they're going to ever connect with any fan? Because this, it's not their primary thought. A wrestling fan turned wrestler or booker promoter is going to know and have that drive. We need to make those fans come out of their seats. We need to make them cry. We need to make them laugh. So when you started incorporating Tough Enough and bringing in these guys basically off the street, that's what I'm just gonna say without disrespect, but that's what's happening. They don't possess. Let's take Maven for example, right? He was a school teacher before he got into Tough Enough. Okay,
Right.
so he was already an adult. He was already a young man, and he decided to pursue a career as a school teacher. Had Tough Enough not put out an ad saying you could possibly become a WWE superstar, would he have ever set foot in a training camp or an indie show? We will never know. But what I'm saying, you see where I'm going with this?
Yep.
You, on the other hand, were at a wrestling school. You were training. You were driving 3 hours to go and train with our dear friend, one of the greatest wrestling trainers, promoters in Southern California, Mr. Jesse Hernandez, School of Hard Knocks, Empire Wrestling Federation. Um, you were seeking it, right?
Yep.
It wasn't just a
Yeah.
competition for you. So I think even nowadays, you know, some of these, I've heard stories that some of these athletes are taken out of high school, not high school, college, and brought in to train to be wrestlers. If they're not pursuing it themselves, it should be a clear indicator that they're not that interested. It's just a
Right.
payday, and they're not going to give what all of you guys and what I give and what we get. You know what I'm saying? You know what I'm saying, Rico?
Yeah. Yeah. It's like I said, it's a lot more than just athletic ability. It has to be a passion
Mm.
because, it hurts.
Yeah.
You know, like I said, with Jesse, I would drive 3.5 hours, work out 3 hours, drive 3.5 hours back, and wouldn't get paid.
Right.
That was for just working out. Now, a show, I get paid $5, $10.
Yeah.
That didn't even cover gas or
Right.
food. But
Yeah.
I fell in love with the business.
Yeah.
And I didn't know I was going to go to WWE. I was going to go, okay, I'm putting my effort into the Empire Wrestling Federation and I'm going to be the heavyweight champion.
Yeah.
That was my goal. And within a few months, I became heavyweight champion because Jesse saw it.
Mm-hmm.
Jesse saw my drive, my passion for the ring, for the business. I really wanted to make an impression at EWF.
Yeah.
I didn't know a tape was going to go up to Connecticut.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know I was going to get a call from Howard Finkel for a
Yeah.
tryout. And when I went up there, I was nervous as heck. And then I ended up getting signed to developmental.
Yeah.
First contract to OVW with Jim Cornette.
Yeah. An incredible
And then
story.
I said, well, yeah. And then I said, you know what? I got to up my game
Yeah.
because now I'm with people because Ohio Valley's been going way before it got contracted with WWE.
Mm-hmm.
So there was already Danny's core guys,
Yeah.
so I had to up my game.
Yeah.
And I raised the bar and shot for that. And then I got called up.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
I had to raise the bar again.
Yeah.
It was a
Passion.
short career,
Yeah.
passion. It was
Passion.
yeah. And
Passion
if you
is the
just go
key.
get an athlete and he go, oh, I'm going to be a wrestler. Okay, I'm going to be a wrestler.
Yeah. Well, it's also it's like a tough parent, right? Okay. And believe me, everybody, I don't want to make out that I'm super tough, and neither Rico either. I'm sure there are plenty of days, Rico, in your life where you've been working hard for something like, man, what is it I'm doing wrong? Come on, this has
Yeah.
got to work, right? We go through that, but that's passion. But there are other people in life, and again, it's not up to us to decide. God is in control, not us. But there are some people who get handed things. That's the term that is
Yeah.
frequently used. They get handed stuff. And now I'll go back to Maven here because he even admits himself now that he was too immature, which is why he lost his job, which is why he got cut. He didn't get it. He was being reckless. He was not. But again, does that, again, we never know. Hypothetically, maybe this is just a thought. Was it because his passion, that drive where he hadn't started training to be a wrestler at 16 and he hadn't done the independent circuit? Maybe because it wasn't as hard for him to get in there that he
Well,
somewhat,
no,
yeah, right,
he got the golden wrapper like Willy Wonka from the Chocolate Factory.
right,
He got the golden candy bar, which whisked him through and stuff like that, but he made of it what he could.
yep,
And I've heard him say, yeah, I wasn't ready for it. And he made mistakes, and that's why he doesn't have the job there.
yeah,
But yeah, you can't blame the guy.
no,
He wasn't brought up
right,
through indies like I was. I mean, 8 months, but I still was brought up through the indies.
yeah.
He was tough enough, which didn't teach anything about locker room protocol, respect and all that stuff. It was just teaching you how to wrestle.
Yeah.
And you had your infighting and stuff like that.
Mhm.
But it didn't teach you anything about the business.
The
Taught you
biz
how to perform.
the business is so intricate, and we're gonna have on a guest. We're gonna bring back with Steve Tatai. We're gonna have on April Hom, the Royal Hawaiian from Glow, one of the major stars of Glow, glamorous, gorgeous ladies of
Well,
wrestling.
Ladies of Wrestling.
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah.
They were in Las Vegas.
Yep, they were in Las Vegas, and I watched it the other day, and obviously we see the Netflix show, which was a dramatized version, not at all like what really happened, but we watched. My wife and I sat down, Tink and I sat down and watched an episode of Glow from back in the day, and I tell you what. Some of these companies now could have a lot to learn from Glow because they really, again, you don't necessarily, you're creating a spectacle, right? It's wrestling is a spectacle. You don't
Yep.
need, and you mentioned there about training guys to do this and to do that and to do this and to do that. Again, if a guy's 6'8", right? Tell me this: a guy who's like Sid Justice,
Yeah.
why is he gonna jump over the top rope like a luchador? It doesn't make sense. It's stupid for that to even occur in the first place. He's 6'8". He's
Yeah.
supposed to be like the Undertaker, just step over the rope and walk slower because
Yeah.
you're creating a spectacle. And these ladies, what they did with Glow was actually very, yeah, it was very, very fantastic. Actually, I'd never seen it in its entirety, but I watched. And I watched the creativity because again, they knew they couldn't wrestle. They were actresses, right? So they had to adapt and find a way to, and they sure as heck did because they ran 4 years or whatever it was, 5 years, and they're still an offshoot going today. Women of Wrestling, WO.
Do you
Wow.
do you know who came from Glow?
Oh, I'm thinking
Who
about
was
it.
in WWE?
It was Ivory, right?
Yep.
That's right. Yep. Yep.
Yep. It was
Yep.
Ivory.
And she did a good job in WWE.
Yeah. She's a sweetheart.
Okay.
Total sweetheart.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
We'll have to
Really great lady.
We'll have to track her down. Maybe we can get her on the same episode as April in the coming weeks here.
Yeah.
I'll reach out. I'll put some feelers out about that one. Um, but yeah, nonetheless, like we'll shoot it back over to Maven. So his career ends. We know he goes through some issues in life, as everybody does. No one's immune to it. We say this time and time again. We also want to let this podcast be a help to our viewers, okay? No
Right.
one's going to be sailing high, riding high forever. Everybody has their issues, whether millionaire or not. Everybody's going to get it. So Maven has a lot of issues. Gets arrested, gets on booze, drugs, alcohol, all that business, right? But then he starts picking the pieces together. He goes in a totally different direction. Ends up doing some media stuff. I think he ended up he works in New York, or he did some like in a bank or something, like totally different stuff he ends up doing. But then I think it was about 3 or 4 years ago, he starts launching this podcast, Maven Huffman. And like I said, I've watched a lot of it. I find some of it entertaining, some of the little nuances he does. Of course, he goes and finds wrestlers from the past and he interviews them, stuff like that. I have one issue with that, and I'm just going to air that grievance now that he did allow Just Incredible to say something negative about Mario Mancini that was untrue. So yeah, that was untrue, and they didn't edit it out. And there's been, we hope that there's some clarification with that at some point because Mario was not guilty of what Just Incredible said he was. That's false information, but nonetheless, Maven, he's been doing well. We've seen him appear with our good friend, Mr. René Dupree, on the Café de René quite often. So who will be joining us again shortly. But yeah,
You know who appears on Maven's show is Stevie Richards.
That's right.
Appears a lot.
That's right.
And Stevie came down and worked his way up through ECW and everything. Stevie and I wrestled a lot also. Switched, I wrestled him as the stylist. I wrestled him as the face Adrian Street character.
Yeah.
Stevie's also wonderful. And Stevie is a wealth of knowledge himself.
Yeah.
He knows a lot. He came up and he paid his dues, and it shows even when he speaks today and stuff like that.
Well, Stevie has a passion for wrestling. Again, that's what I'm talking about.
Yes.
You have the difference between the athlete who's just there for a payday and then the guy who's passionate about it. May not be the best athlete, but doesn't need to be. Because at the end of the day,
and that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying. I mean, he wasn't built. Mm-hmm. He was athletically built. Mm-hmm. He knew how to wrestle.
Yeah.
And he had charisma.
Yeah.
His entrance, he was all over the place. Yeah. And he did this.
Yeah.
Wow. And then he would jump and climb into the rope and shake his long hair and everything. And he did the right to censor.
Yeah. Yeah. And he did well. That was a good thing.
The right the right to censor, had the good father instead of the godfather, changed Val Venus, had Ivory.
Yeah.
The right to censor.
Well, he was also part of the Blue World Order in the ECW.
Yep.
So Stevie was one of those guys, and I'll use him and I'm glad you brought him up because I do respect Stevie a lot. He's a positive guy. I've seen some of his podcasts. I like the fact that, like us, he focuses on health and he talks about health. He talks about injury prevention and things like that, which are so vitally important in pro wrestling. But what I like about him is he owns who he is. He's never going to be the 275-pound genetic freak, right? He's not going to be that. But he's worked with his ability and pushed his limitations to create these memorable characters. And again, now a fantastic show where he goes in depth into the analysis and some of the, more technical side of pro wrestling. But he does but he's also not afraid to voice his opinions. If something's wrong, he'll call it out and he's not afraid to do that. So I respect the heck out of him. But again, you're talking, so it's interesting. Again, now he's partnered with Maven because you have this guy who grew up with such a vested passion for the business, like Stevie. And then you got a guy who and again, I'm not saying that Maven didn't have passion for it. I'm just saying, he got into it in an unconventional manner at the time. That was
that's a good way to put it. He arrived in an unconventional through a television show and he took advantage of it.
Yeah.
So I mean, hats off to Maven. He took with what he had and he did what he could with what he had where he was.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? And he pushed it all the way until they said goodbye.
Yep. Yep.
And then he didn't cry about it.
No.
He picked himself up, got himself focused, and now look at him. He's got his passion for his podcast.
Yeah.
And and he had passion for wrestling when I was there.
Yeah.
When he was there, but he did the best of what he had where he was.
Yeah.
And who knows if he'd have been brought up through the indies where he could have gone.
Mm-hmm.
Like I said, he had an angle with the Undertaker. Yeah. I mean, geez. I mean, there's a line to get an angle with the dead man.
Well, he eliminated him from, I think, the 2002 Royal Rumble. That was how it started. He eliminated him from the Royal Rumble. So, he had a huge boost to his career. Like I said, I think the Maven now, which is interesting. We often hear about, everything is like fine wine. It gets better with age. And it's true. It is exactly
Yeah.
true. I cannot tell you how, we've seen now the top stars in all the companies. They're no longer in their 20s because this
No.
is not, it really, especially now. And I think I will say this. I think it's a little bit more difficult in today's society to become creative because your mind and your eyes are constantly inundated with social media, ad campaigns, TV shows, movies. Whereas back in the 80s and the 90s, even the early 2000s, it wasn't as prevalent. So you had to sit there in silence by yourself. You couldn't look at the internet on your cell phone, and ideas would come to you. And you would have more of an original thought as opposed to just an amalgamation of ideas that you've seen running through your mind, right?
Right.
So,
I put it that if I got into wrestling in my 20s, I probably wouldn't have made it because, I didn't have internet. And I mean, the popular cell phone at that time was an Ericsson, and
right,
it wasn't a flip phone. It just had the shield that blocked the numbers
that's
and
true.
had red digits. It
Yep,
was the Ericsson.
I heard about the
So very basic, and you had to look up encyclopedias and go to the library to research stuff.
yeah.
So I might not have been as successful, even though it was a short time. I got in when I was older,
Mhm.
so I had all these resources
Yeah,
and
yeah,
I could watch videos and stuff like that and learn
yeah,
off the internet. And well, I was never really part, and I'm still not
yeah.
part of social media. This is about as social media as I get. I don't have Instagram, TikTok, Bing Bong, Zing Zang, whatever's out there.
Yeah.
I don't do any of that.
Which
So,
which is why I'm going to remind everybody or any casual viewer right now to lay the smack down on that subscribe button. Make sure you subscribe, make sure you like, and make sure that you share this with your friends and family because this is one of the very few places that you're going to see this wrestling legend Rico Constantino. Just saying. All right. So this is where you're going to garner knowledge from this man who's lived multiple lifetimes. And I can tell you that with the experience that he's had. And again, one of the main reasons that we created this for each of you is to share some of that wisdom because that's what life's about. It's about learning from what happened before, not repeating the same mistake, and garnering information to make it better. And that's all we're trying to do here. Rico and I, we have a genuine love, passion for professional wrestling. Mine's been my entire life. Even Rico, before you were in the business, you loved it. You were there
oh
watching
yeah,
events and stuff. So it's genuinely when we say something here, it's not to knock anything. It's just hopefully to lend another perspective to the conversation that may sway somebody because you never know. Never feel that it's like what you think is insignificant or what you say is insignificant because you don't know. Maybe that one person who's meant to hear it will take that and things will change. And that's why we do what we do. That's why Maven does what he does. You know,
yeah, yeah.
he's
And Stevie
and
and
Steve.
Renee
Yeah, we're
and
sharing.
all. Yes, we're sharing, and I've been blessed. And like I said last week with our guest, you found out two more things that you never thought I did, but I
Right,
did.
right, exactly. I'm shocked every week. I learn something else from you, Rico. It's always a different profession that you've been involved, but you are an inspiration to me. And I tell you what, uh, like I said, this is just our personal conversation, fans here. But yeah, Rico, when you came into my life last year, just a little over a year ago, and we did our first interview. Like I said to you then, you said some things to me that rattled the inside of my cage to in a positive way to make me realize sometimes, because we do get complacent and I'm sure you viewers do too. And you think, oh, I can't do this or I can't do that or yeah, times pass or whatever it is, whatever the negative is, which is an accumulation of probably setbacks and knockbacks in life. But once you switch your thinking into I can, right? I can, and then your prayers are directed to God to help you do that for a positive reason, things start to happen and they happen quickly too. So,
That's why I do my motto at the end of the show.
yep,
So stay tuned. You'll get my motto.
absolutely. Stay tuned. You'll get those words of wisdom, those golden nuggets of wisdom.
And I
So,
just I just wanted to help all our
yep,
viewers. Like I said, when I spoke to you, I was just being me.
Yep.
And what we talked about and the questions you asked, I was just being me.
Yep.
And they made a light bulb go off in your head.
Yep.
See, that's what I hope this show does for people, that one, at least one, if not more, all of a sudden we say something, touch on a subject, and the light bulb goes off.
Yep.
And they go, I was waiting for that nugget.
Mm-hmm.
Now I can do this,
Mm-hmm.
or now I know what to expect from this, or now I know how to handle this because Rico, Emir, or one of our guests have said something to help and enrich other people's lives.
Yep, indeed. Amen. And I tell you what, we're not going to take it a step further without, because Rico and I, we do this. We are believers. So I want to acknowledge our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. Without him, without our faith in God and his son, we wouldn't be doing what we're doing today. I tell you that because, I've had occasions in my life, Rico, I know yours, where God, he's always lending a hand. He's guiding us every day. But, to acknowledge that and to understand that everything you do in life is because you're being permitted to do so. Never think that it's all you, because it's not. You're permitted. If you're not meant to go through a brick wall, no matter what you do, you're not going to go through it. Simple as that. So,
Not unless you're part of the power team.
unless you're part of the power team, which
You got to
Rico
break
was.
bricks.
Yes, which Rico was. So good one. I like that, Rico. So as we bring this one sort of to the close, because I want to tie it in with where I started with Tough Enough.
Right,
So
go
the
ahead.
wrestling business now, again, we're seeing some kerfuffle taking place. There's a lot of cutbacks, releases,
Kerfuffle?
a kerfuffle. I guess I could say a kerfuffle.
Kerfuffle.
Yeah, like a
Oh,
mess, like
okay.
a big mess,
I,
like a kerfuffle, like I don't know where I picked up that word. Maybe it was my mom. Thanks, mom. So a kerfuffle or something like
kerfuffle.
that. Um,
At least you didn't say gefilte fish.
what is that? Gefilte fish? What's that?
Gefilte fish. It's
Is
a
that
Jewish
Jewish?
delicacy.
Oh,
Jewish
okay.
delicacy.
Gefilte
Gefilte
fish.
fish.
Gefilte fish to all our Jewish viewers out there.
All right, go with your thought. I'm sorry. I
That's all
had to
right.
get that in.
Yeah, I get it, man. So with all this mess that's going on, this chaos, and now fans are starting to talk out. They're not enjoying the product anymore. They're not in, numbers are dwindling. Obviously, budget cuts are being made. Something's got to give. Something's got to change. And that's why I'm hoping this episode and aids to that narrative. The fact that we talked about this era that began with the Tough Enough, where you're bringing in talent, you're giving them you're shuttling them to the top without allowing them to plow their trade on the indies. Not, if you're going to farm people, farm them from the indies. All right. That's where they're
Well,
honing their craft. That's where they're built. Right. Right.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
you
That I
know,
mean, what I became, Jesse started it, and OVW just took it to another level. Well, actually, OVW, Power Pro, and Heartland Wrestling. I mean, Jim Cornette thought so much of me, he put all three belts on me at one time.
yep.
I was traveling every week to all three shows, doing television shows as the heavyweight champion.
Yep.
So, I mean, I can never thank Jim Cornette enough,
Hmm.
for believing in me and just taking and honing my talent, directing me, Danny Davis, like I said, and his guys. That did so much for me. I don't think I would have made a splash if I went from EWF right into WWE.
No.
Uh, I'd have fizzled out quick.
Yeah, no, you need that experience. And I do, before I would be remiss to not mention this right now. So, obviously, Rico, but for the benefit of our viewers who don't know, Delirium made our official debut in United Wrestling Network, Championship Wrestling, ran by Mr. Dave Marquez, Zicky Dice, and Peter Avalon. Zicky from the NWA, Peter from AEW, part of the booking team. And I will say this: the professionalism, the etiquette, the storytelling, the talent, it is off the hook. I mean, this is a place that, to be quite frank, this could become a number 3 organization. TV production
Well,
values.
You want to know why? Is because there's no other indies around. And Championship Wrestling is picking the best of these other indie guys who already honed, and they're polishing themselves. Like I said, the clay is being molded, and now they're given a shot again
Yeah.
at with this Championship Wrestling.
Yeah.
You and Delirium, you guys are going to make a splash because you know who you are. You know you got your charisma, you've got your characters, and you got a goal.
Hmm.
You know what you want. And I think everybody involved, Peter Avalon, who was a guest on our show, loved him. And he's got the brain
Hmm.
to be the booker and stuff like that. He sees talent.
Yeah.
And I think Championship Wrestling is going to surprise. I
Yeah.
think it's going to come up quick
Yeah.
because it's wrestling
Hmm.
like the 80s. It's wrestling,
Hmm.
and people want that.
Yeah.
I don't know why the big company can't do that.
No,
I don't know why.
but this is what I'm saying. I think now, if if they're being stubborn to not move in that direction, there is an opening now. There's an opening because
Yeah.
there's a yearning, there's a need. True professional wrestling fans want professional wrestling as a form of entertainment. They want to see the grappling, they want to see the characters, they want to see the athleticism, they want to hear people talk, not for 20, 30 minutes, but they want to hear them talk, but they want to hear, and they want to see all this stuff. And I think now, like you said, give kudos to Peter Avalon. Peter, yeah, I love Peter, man. I always, every time I see him, he's just a tremendous talent. I've always admired his work since AEW when he played the librarian. It's just a tremendous team. I'm actually going to leave a link in the description of this video to the United Wrestling Network, to Championship Wrestling, so you can see what Rico and I are talking about. Make sure you subscribe to their channel too. They are available on some TV channels across the United States, but I don't have space to list all of them, so you can catch weekly episodes from Championship. There's Gotham Wrestling that's now debuted out of New York, up on the East Coast, and then there's Memphis Championship Wrestling, another division of United Wrestling Network. And like I said, they're fairly new. David Marquez put together United Wrestling Network in 2013, so they're going on about 12 years. Of course, COVID, it struck a lot of people
Yeah.
out. So it's
Yeah.
the relaunch right now for Championship, and I encourage everybody out there to check it out. Any true professional wrestling fan that wants to be highly entertained, go out and check that out. But yeah, I think that's a kind of a good place to kind of tailor the end of this episode, Rico, is just to say, hey, you know what? It's farming from a group of people just because they're athletes does not translate to making great stars in pro wrestling. Simple as that.
Yeah. No. And another thing I want to bring up is baseball, basketball, football. They go there to play the game. They
Yeah.
don't care about the fans. They care
Mm-mm.
about winning.
Mm-hmm.
And so you don't see them, you know, was it LeBron James that did the powder?
LeBron James was it?
Before he
That was what's
did
that? But that's basketball, right?
basketball.
Yeah. I thought you said.
I think he did the powder.
Okay.
Uh, the guy from football, Ray, he used to come out and do the stomp with the Baltimore
What
team.
was it? 90s or 80s?
Ravens. Yeah, no, 2000s. Oh my God, I can't believe I just forgot his name. Ray. Oh, he was a linebacker, good linebacker.
For me,
But you
I
rarely
don't know.
see people
Yeah.
come out and play to the crowd.
Yeah.
They are pure athletes, focused, and that's all they focus on.
Yeah.
They want to win the game. They want to get team going. And so they might give this to the crowd or do this to the crowd, but they're not into the crowd. They're into each other teammates, and
Yeah.
they're there to win a game.
Yeah.
So, baseball, the same thing.
Yep.
You know,
There's a spot for everyone, Rico. I think it's fair to say there is a
Yeah.
spot for everyone. But again, if you're exclusively plucking from that elite line of athletes, don't
you're
expect.
going to get that personality.
Yeah, exactly. Don't
You're-
expect.
you
the guy-
know,
Yeah.
not taking anything away from them. They're
Mhm.
great athletes in all the sports we mentioned, but they're not charismatic. They don't need to be. They're
No.
not paid for their charisma. They're paid for their production.
Yeah.
They're paid for their athletic ability.
Yeah.
And that's all they're paid for. That's all
Yeah.
they signed up for.
Yeah.
Then once in a while, you get somebody break off, do commercials. Dennis Rodman is the one in basketball that just
Yeah.
went off
He
with the
had some
orange
charisma.
hair.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Dennis
it's
Rodman took it.
you can't paint everyone with the same brush. It's fair to say there
No.
will be the odd athlete that can break through like Kurt Angle and make
Yep.
something of it. But if you're constantly farming from that source, don't expect to have a
A
smorgasbord.
professional wrestler.
Don't
No.
expect to have a pro wrestling company. Expect to have an athletic pro wrestling, more shoot style than anything else, than entertainment. It would be hard to call it sports
Yeah.
entertainment at that point because you're really not going to have any in there. It's just going to be
No.
athletic. That's it. So
Yeah. So I believe you cannot take a professional athlete who is a professional. I don't care what sport he's in. And unless you work with him, bring him through the bottom up, teach him, you're not going to have a professional wrestler. You're going to
yeah.
have one darn good athlete and somebody who stays in shape and
Mhm.
does what he's told. You know, hey, I want you to hit 40 home runs this year. Okay, 40 home runs.
That's it.
You
Because
know,
their
you
focus is
know,
that. That's it. Like you said, that's
yeah.
all it is. Their focus
Batting
on
averages,
yeah.
shoot three percentage, but that's all they focus on. You
Yep.
can't take somebody like that and put them into professional wrestling.
Yeah. And the same can be said with a booking committee too. You can't get somebody who's an executive in charge of I don't know, or somebody they've tried it before in wrestling. Not to slam too much on it, but Vince Russo. So okay, so they took Russo, a TV aspiring TV writer, and they tried to mesh him with WWE, and it was just a cluster for many years. Had someone else not been monitoring him, it may have been totally worse because we saw what happened in WCW. And so, again, apples and oranges. If you can, I heard this described the other day before we close on your line, Rico. Um, uh, if someone has never gotten goosebumps on their arms or on the back of their neck when the greats from the 80s and 90s came out and they weren't caught up in it, don't get involved in the business because obviously don't be a booker, don't be a part of the booking committee, don't own a wrestling company. Get out as fast as you can because it's going to fail. Simple as that. If you don't feel the
Yep.
rush, you don't belong in it. There you go.
No.
It's a
Square
safe.
peg, round hole.
Yep. It's. I don't want to say the word safe. It's a wrestling is a privilege. Pro wrestling is a privilege to be
Oh,
a
yeah.
part of. It's I feel privileged. Rico, you do likewise. We feel privileged to be able to talk about the pro wrestling industry and be involved in the narrative, and that's something to be respected. So let's respect what truly is pro wrestling. And then Rico, I'll let you.
Amen.
Amen. I'll let you close it out, Rico.
All right, everybody. Here's my motto. It's what your mind can conceive, your heart can achieve. That's been my motto my whole life, and it's worked. Not saying I haven't had failures. I've had my share of failures, but I've had more successes because what my mind can conceive, the human spirit is fantastic.
Mhm.
Your heart can achieve. And that
Amen.
comes through passion.
Amen. Amen. Passion is the word, is the key of the day. Ladies and gentlemen, we want to thank each and every one of you for sharing a little bit of your time with us. We want to remind you to hit that subscribe button, hit the likes, and share with your friends and family. And we will be back with you right here on Styling. Well, actually, no, we won't be back with you next week. We'll be back week after because I'm going to be in Canada for 80s Con. So we'll be back in 2 weeks from now. Until then, everybody, God bless. Rico, God bless you.
I'm going back on the Ponderosa. Yeehaw!
We'll see you next week, everybody. Till then.